Jupiter is the great benefic planet within us. It's the part of us that makes life feel like it's worth living. Now that is a very big statement. So the first question is, what would make life worth living? So a content, well-adjusted, psychologically healthy person who has a sense of inner peace amidst the ups and downs of life, the inevitable problems at any stage of life, they're going to tell you that each day they can get through each day because they have something to live for that's greater than their individual ego, or even greater than their individual happiness. So in short, Jupiter is the planet that gives us something to live for that is greater than us. And when it comes to happiness, because often Jupiter is equated with the planet that makes us happy, or that gives us that inner content. But oftentimes happiness is seen as an endpoint in and of itself. But the state of being happy, at least in the English language, is too simple and it's too momentary for us to have that be as a single purpose in and of itself. So for Jupiter, what happiness becomes is something so much deeper than just that passing emotion that we have that we call happy. But in this theoretical, very well-adjusted person that we're talking about, who has this healthy outlook on life, they're not motivated by that emotion, by happiness, by feeling happiness. They're motivated because their life has a greater meaning beyond just themselves. And the byproduct is happiness. But if you want to expand that word, you could say it's more like a peaceful contentedness, with the idea that everything will work out in the end, and if everything hasn't worked out, it's not the end yet. So Jupiter is the force within our consciousness that is generating this internal sensation of contentedness. But that contentedness is not the goal. It's a byproduct of everything else that Jupiter is generating. So it's this impulse that will give us this search for meaning, which we can end up finding that meaning, but it wants to find something deeper to life, and that our life has some kind of purpose that extends beyond just our day-to-day perspective on things. So if we didn't have Jupiter at all within us in our consciousness, life would just be this boring slog of moment to moments strung together until we die. Life wouldn't have this kind of existential search to it. And there would be really no seeing beyond the daily strife that we go to that has a bigger meaning to it. And we would feel like we're just slaves to our immediate needs and desires and the problems that we have. Jupiter helps us see beyond that day-to-day way of living. So Jupiter is a fire planet, which means that it gives us a passion and an active strength to pursue something, very similar to the Sun and Mars, and those are Jupiter's friends, the other two fire planets. But unlike the Sun's fire, which is to push us to express and to purify our soul and to discover what our soul desires to express in this lifetime, and also unlike Mars's fire, which is to solve problems and to achieve a goal and to get better at something, to practice and to become great at something through that step-by-step process of improvement. But Jupiter's fire is to push us to connect our soul with other souls and other aspects of creation in order to find a common meaning and to find a common purpose with other things around us. And even more so, to find a common meaning with creation itself. So our soul is striving to connect to something bigger than itself. And you can say that striving to connect with something bigger is striving to connect with God, or striving to connect with all that is, or the super soul, whatever you want to call it, the rest of creation that we are a part of. And so that's what makes Jupiter the planet of our spiritual connection, which we're going to talk more about Jupiter and spirituality a little bit later. But it's that base function that Jupiter does. It's this fire desire to connect with something bigger than us. So in a word, Jupiter is the force within us that gives us purpose. And we're going to be dissecting the good and the bad types of Jupiters in the next couple videos. But a quick example is, you can think of, is my purpose to build quality houses so that people can enjoy live in them? Is that my purpose? Is my purpose to satisfy my career ambitions? Is my purpose to say go and enjoy nature as much as possible, to say live in nature? Or is my purpose to be with my children and take care of my family? Is my purpose to write fiction? As you can see, there are millions of purposes, and none are either good or bad in and of themselves, but it's Jupiter that gives us a motivation to find that purpose. And it's the aspect of human nature that drives us to commit to something that's going to help us keep on living our life day in and day out. So the big question becomes, how fulfilling is that purpose that I've defined for myself? How fulfilling will it be in the long run? How fulfilling that purpose will be will depend on the health of Jupiter in a person's chart. Like I said, we'll discuss how healthy and unhealthy Jupiter behaves. But it's important just for this to understand that we all have this drive within us to fulfill something in our life, regardless of whether our Jupiter is functioning well or not. It could be a very, we could say, superficial purpose, like to just make a ton of money. Is that going to be fulfilling in the long term? People that make all the money in the world, where that becomes their sole purpose, they end up realizing that that is not fulfilling at the end of the day. So it really depends on the health of Jupiter to see how fulfilling it is. But the drive to have purpose itself is what Jupiter is doing. So intimately tied to purpose is what we believe in. So when someone asks you, why is your purpose X, Y, and Z? Very rarely someone is not going to say, or very rarely someone will say, or they really will never say, I don't know. I don't know why that's my purpose. Because what we do is we create a rationale for why our purpose is what it is. So the why question is, I believe it's my moral duty to take care of my family, and the morality you can extend on why is it your moral duty, etc. And if you believe it's your duty, you believe it's your purpose to have a fulfilling career, why? Because then your financial life will be in order and you'll be able to thrive and have more free time, and you'll be able to live in better comfort. So there's a reason why you've created that purpose. And you could say that you believe people deserve to live in a high quality house if your purpose is to build nice houses. And also because that's the best thing I know how to do in my life, to make good houses as an architect or a builder. So there's a reason why you create a purpose. You believe in something that creates the foundation for your purpose. So Jupiter is also a male planet, which gives it the ability of logical and objective thinking and objective reasoning rather than subjective reasoning. So Jupiter is this force of human nature that will logically create a worldview based on your experiences that serves to explain how you see society is ordered or how creation is ordered. So again, what you believe in, we use Jupiter to logically say, I believe it because this, and this, and this. This makes sense to me. It's a logical process. And that logical foundation establishes what you believe in, and then it establishes your purpose. So that also gives us this ability for creating notions of what is moral and ethical within society and within the world. So Jupiter is also this force that creates this understanding of what is right and wrong, or what's in a gray area, our ability to ethically come to conclusions about what logically makes sense about our beliefs and our worldview. And also, of course, our individual role in society and in creation. And so we call all of that a belief system. It's a system, it's multifaceted, and it's built upon logical steps of why things are as they are, or how we fit into the larger creation in general. So this is why we say Jupiter is the planet of higher learning and philosophy. It generates that impulse, or that generates that kind of desire to know about systems of information and philosophy, of course. And it's this part of us that's really kind of generating how we see the world working on a macro level, whether it's political beliefs, our understanding of justice, our religious beliefs, etc. But it's the macro view. And again, it's how we see ourselves in it, but it's bigger than ourselves. It's something that a good philosophy is able to encompass all types of creation and all systems and how other people are fit into it. It's not really a poorly made philosophy will only account for your own desires, but Jupiter does not only account for one's own self. It has to account for many different factors at play. So that's why we say Jupiter gives us this macro perspective on the world. So it's really interesting when you start to think about and to contemplate how moral and ethical dilemmas that have to do about how society is structured. And again, I'm saying macro, but you can kind of just say society. And Jupiter is the planet that deals with the masses of people in that sense. We have this part of us that contemplates how society should be ordered. And it's interesting when you think about it, because you see these exact same concerns have been with humanity since ancient times. And I think sometimes people like to convince themselves that the problems we're experiencing today in our world, they're things that have only come about in the past couple centuries, and that our problems are unique. But the ancient philosophers of Greece and of Western civilization in general, of ancient China, if you read Confucius, and of course the Vedic literature, the vast Vedic literature, they're all dealing with the same exact problems of morals and ethics, and also how governance and society should be governed, the same problems that we're dealing with today. And usually when you look at the ancient writings, you see them with much greater breadth and potency than a lot of what gets written today, because we call them classics because they're still here today, and they're classics because they're timeless. But in those classics, and of course Shakespeare, I don't want to not include Shakespeare, but you see the same dilemmas within humanity about these bigger questions of life, the whys and the hows of things work. That has been a part of human nature since human civilization has existed. So this just goes to show you the continuity of human nature. And as long as Jupiter has been moving through the heavens and in the sky, and humans have been on Earth, we're being influenced by this energetic force of Jupiter. And it's giving us this way of contemplating and producing philosophies and systems of belief about how the world is structured, really from the top down. So knowing what we know about Mars in the Mars videos, there's a really close similarity with Mars and Jupiter when it comes to beliefs. So Jupiter and Mars are mutual friends. So when they're conjunct, or when they're aspecting one another, or in each other's signs, they're both benefiting from one another. And so Mars is this aspect of us that creates ideas. It's this fire that creates ideas about what we should or shouldn't do in life, which is a kind of belief system. It's about the ought and ought nots. We should or shouldn't do this because this is a logical way to do it. That's really similar to what I'm saying about Jupiter. But Mars is the more mundane and practical day-to-day belief system that is about avoiding problems, or about avoiding what can be negative and striving to do something positive in any kind of situation you can think of. But it's more mundane, such as you shouldn't buy a car without first taking it to a mechanic and to see what's wrong with the car, and to understand why the person is selling the used car. So Mars generates a belief system on how to live in order to prevent problems from happening in the future. So what happens is that Jupiter takes Mars' belief system and brings it up to the next level. So bringing a used car to the mechanic, the Mars logic is, I don't want to get screwed over because the car could have a ton of problems that the person is not telling me. Jupiter taking it to the next level is saying doing that is important because it's important to investigate major purchases as much as possible in order to not get ripped off. And that doesn't just have to do with cars, but all large purchases. So Mars has this way of doing things, this really practical way of, you got to bring the car to a mechanic, you have to investigate the car to yourself, these ways to avoid this problem so you don't buy a broken car. And then Jupiter really extends it, or you could say backs up that practical habit, that practical way of should or shouldn't do something, with this kind of big picture philosophy and belief system for why we should do things. And again, both are logical functions, but then Jupiter bringing it to a bigger level is saying all people would benefit if they performed this behavior. This is an action that can extend to all of society. If everyone did what I'm doing, people would be better off. And so then it's creating a philosophy. All people should go to a mechanic, or they should really investigate that used car purchase. So when you really think about it, any kind of philosophy that we create, this system, this worldview that Jupiter is generating and creating within us, It should reflect a truth in nature that is applicable to all human beings, and it should be applied, and it can be applied to all people in all circumstances as best as possible. So for something to be, quote, morally true, shouldn't all people live by that code of ethics? And shouldn't all people be able to benefit from that code of ethics and not just sectioning off philosophies as this society should do it this way, but this other society, they should do it a different way? So these are really interesting questions, and these moral questions are fascinating and they're fun to think about. But Jupiter is really concerned about universality and that ability to encompass as much as possible into your worldview. And it's that ability of expanding to a universal level. And that word expansion is a very common word used for Jupiter. But that's why the classics, and such as Shakespeare, that's why they can remain for so long, because it doesn't matter which generation reads it, it's a universal. One of my favorite theater directors, Robert Wilson, he said he is all about universality, so that any theater piece that he does, any person on the street should be able to enjoy it. So it's removing that kind of elite or that kind of commoner kind of way of approaching the world. It's saying that the best works of art have a universal nature to them. And it goes with philosophies. The philosophies that last the longest and have the greatest truth within them can be applied in almost any context. So an important skill of Jupiter's that has to do with creating a philosophy and generating a worldview is the ability for abstract thinking. And this is a very unique ability of human beings, the ability to take an idea and expand it beyond the current time and place, to see the logical steps and the implications of what that idea is producing in any kind of variety of situations. You could think of it kind of as the contemplative ability of human beings, but you could call it just abstract thinking. And this expansive quality is the ability to extend beyond things of oneself. You see that theme again. It's to take things beyond your individuality and to amplify and to encompass all of creation in what you're considering about, or at least to amplify and think about other people. You don't have to think about how everything is all one, like everything is everything. And it's all this, that's an extremely abstract notion. And Pisces, the sign that Jupiter rules, is the ability to encompass all creation, the ocean of experience, how every experience can be separate, but it's all connected by one entity, which would be the ocean itself. But it's the skill of abstract thinking that Jupiter gives us. But the important part is that Jupiter doesn't just stop at human beings and human society, but it's encompassing all types of experiences into its worldview. So a high quality Jupiter is able to think on abstract levels about how human beings see things, but they'll also look at how a tree would be able to perceive something, or how maybe a cat or dog is seeing a situation from their point of view. And even you can think about how beings in other realms of existences are interacting with human beings from other realities or dimensions, how they would look upon human beings. So it's not just about how human society functions, but beyond humans even. And so the Vedic astrologer, the Vedic sage Jaimini, who's one of my favorite astrologers and one of my favorite systems of astrology, he says that Jupiter is the planet that gives a person the greatest ability for writing, along with the moon, Mercury, and to some extent Venus. But Jupiter is the planet that generates the best kind of writing ability. So I've talked about this before, but the moon gives us our ability for imagination of the past, present, and the future. And also the moon gives us social intelligence. Mercury is the actual skill of writing and also the ability to be objective and investigate something in the material world. And Venus is more of the storytelling and fictional planet. And Venus also gives kind of an aesthetic and a poetic quality to writing. Venus is the poetic planet. But Jupiter gives the ultimate writing skill, because Jupiter gives this person this ability to think abstractly from other people's perspective and to expand one's own perspective and to see other ways that the world is viewed from as clear as possible. I was reading a book, I have to find the title, but it was a British book, but it was really beautiful. And I'll search for it. I don't know if I'm gonna be able to find it, but if I find it, I'll put it in this picture in this video. But it was so fascinating because the author was going through the various perspectives of different characters that were in this small village. And then for a couple paragraphs, he was talking from the perspective of the tree over decades of time. So the author jumps into the tree seeing, oh, when I was young, and then this farmer was doing this and this with his sheep, and then 30 years later, I remember that couple was sitting below me, and they were a young romantic couple. And then later on, during that storm, so he was telling the story from the perspective of the tree, just to give more context to the story. It wasn't a big part of the narrative, but it was fascinating. I've never thought about telling a story from the point of view of a tree. But there you have this ability to expand one's perspective into other levels of creation as clearly as you can. And what that helps to do is it brings deeper meaning and deeper, you could say, philosophical roundedness into the writing, and to be able to communicate bigger ideas and to put more meaning into the writing itself. So most importantly in that is to portray other people and situations as truthfully as possible. But it's the Jupiter aspect of writing that inserts deeper meaning that ends up lasting for longer. And that's what great writing has. It has these profound lessons within them. So this next idea I'm going to talk about, I'll probably do an entire video on it. But the lack of this Jupiterian ability where you're able to expand into other realms of perception and to think abstractly on that level. The opposite of that you could see as this concept of what is called cultural appropriation. And that idea is that an artist or a writer or anybody living has to essentially stay in their lane of experience. And they have to do that as a matter of moral necessity, and that nothing outside of one's direct experience, they should not use anything out of their direct experience. And to adapt something into your work as an artist, you're not allowed to do that if it's not part of your direct experience. Not allowed. Like I said, it's a moral philosophy, this cultural appropriation. Now this, as I'm saying, is essentially the exact opposite of what Jupiter within us is doing, which is to encompass more. And cultural appropriation is saying that when you observe the world outside of you and anything that is not you, and you could say sampling information, like how a musician will sample songs from other artists or take inspiration from other artists, and you do that and you incorporate that into something that you're creating. Basically, cultural appropriation, the people who abide by this say that that is nothing more than stealing. And why this is such a toxic and essentially poisoned Jupiter consciousness is because that human civilization is built on the borrowing of ideas from person to person that you don't have to directly experience to understand what that idea is or why that idea means what it means. So that isn't to say that certain cultures don't extort or exploit other cultures, and that there haven't been times where, say, someone steals an idea and they don't give credit to the person that inspired that idea. Of course, that happens. But you simply can't remove this impulse within us, this Jupiter within us, that seeks to this expression of our consciousness, and say that you can't bring things into your life that you didn't directly experience and then learn from those other ideas. So trying to beat that out of a person, that you're just stealing that idea in a cynical and malicious way, and you just want to dominate other people. That's what cultural appropriation is. No, it's an extremely it's a toxic Jupiter. And it's because that eventually humans are always going to reach out into the world around them, into the world beyond their individual self, and apply what they're gathering into their worldview. I don't have to have been stabbed in order to say knives are sharp and I've seen people get hurt by knives, and you know, you have to be careful and you have to practice knife safety. I don't have to have practiced knife safety to believe that worldview. What have I done? I've borrowed that idea from another person that has maybe explained that idea. Even though I do practice knife safety and I know how to use knives and I have practiced that, but if you have never done something and you simply learn from someone else, that's not stealing. I didn't steal that idea, it's just an idea. And so a good Jupiter is on this constant process of taking in information from other cultures, from other languages, other dynamics and ways of living, other types of food. And it's just a part of the human nature to do something like that. So cultural appropriation is this way to try to kind of like beat the Jupiter out of a person, but it's never going to happen because Jupiter is just a part of how we see and interact with the world. So back to the idea of writing, another reason why Jupiter is the great writing planet, it's because Jupiter is the planet of creativity itself. So some astrologers will attribute the planet Venus to creativity, but Venus isn't generating creative ideas. Venus is the planet of aesthetic sensibilities and the ability to recognize and apply symmetry and proportions into things. It's the ability to identify that and also to modify what you create into something that we could call beautiful. But Jupiter is the force that is generating something new and putting that out into the world that most importantly comes from within us. So I was talking about how appropriating ideas, if you just take ideas from everywhere else and combine them and then put it out there as yours, you're kind of just, you're citing other people. But did that come from within you? And is there any kind of originality to what you've created? So a strong and healthy Jupiter is able to find something original that they haven't seen before and able to put that out into the world. So that's why, as well as Mercury, Jupiter and Mercury are two unique planets in that they're both the planets of manifestation. It will bring something into concrete reality. So when we're working with astrology transits, we're looking for Mercury and Jupiter to actually bring that thing into the world, for it to actually come about and manifest. And Mercury and Jupiter make things real in front of us. So everyone likes when, say, Jupiter is coming along in a transit because it's able to manifest whatever we're generating within inside of us. And since Jupiter's expansiveness, to manifest abundance and ideally wealth, but also can be the creative inspiration and also a sense of optimism, all coming from within us and what's flowing within us. Jupiter wants to put that out into the world. So Jupiter is the planet of creating something in its pure form. So the ultimate creative act is creating another human being, and that is why Jupiter is the planet of children, both the desire and the creation of a new human being into the world, that comes directly and literally from us, creating the impulse to create a child. And it's also the childlike mentality of innocence and optimism and curiosity about the world. So a Jupiter has this kind of lightness to it and this ability to see things how a child sees things before reality starts to kick in and the practicalities of life start to happen. Children have this big expansive view of all possibilities available at one's disposal. So Jupiter gives a person that kind of frame of mind to be able to see things with new eyes, to see the same things with new eyes, to look at them different. And you're essentially creating a new way of looking at the world. And that could be minute to minute, day to day, and throughout lifetime. So Jupiter is giving that kind of childlike innocence to see reality in new ways. Jupiter is also commonly described as the planet of wisdom. And that's because it gives this ability to be able to expand and abstract our ideological understanding and to see one's place in the world from a bird's eye view, which is essentially the result of all of these attributes I'm talking about. So Jupiter, the planet of wisdom, what is wisdom? Wisdom is intelligence plus experience plus humility. And some people can be, as a young person in years, wise beyond their years because they have this kind of natural combination to them. The ability to incorporate experiences, to be able to be naturally intelligent and to see the world in an objective and logical way, and to also be humble. So these people will have a nice, healthy Jupiter within them, which can make them wise beyond their years. So I don't necessarily mean intellectually brilliant, but that you're able to put the world together in an accurate way. And that also that you've lived a life and you're able to see how things play out. And it's truthful, things happen in that way. You're not foolish or naive in a certain sense. You can understand using your intelligence plus your experience that, yeah, that's how things normally work themselves out. And you're essentially, your worldview and your belief system are accurate. And people look at that and they say, yeah, that's a well-rounded way of understanding of how the world works. And as you live life, you see it play out and repeat and so on. And then also being able to see yourself from a bigger perspective or be able to see outside yourself. And that gives that ability of humility and being humble about the world. So there's this idea that the wisdom of a child and the desire to see things from a pure perspective as a child would do, and to be able to see things in a very positive frame of mind. And that all, of course, is Jupiter, the purity of a child's look into the world. And so that is all Jupiter, to be able to have this kind of pure vision and to see things as clearly as possible, but also see them in a positive light. So I think that the humility factor is probably the most key ingredient that goes into wisdom. And I've met more wise people who are on the lower economic ladder, the everyday people, and the people that do their work and they don't play themselves out to be so much bigger than they really are. And they are able to give such a profound contribution of wisdom to other people and to younger generations. And I think a big part of that is because they don't see themselves bigger than their britches. They tend, well, in my experience, they tend to be on the lower end of the economic ladder. And why is that detail important? It's because people who are on the higher end of the economic ladder tend to see themselves as more important, as they tend to lose humility as they ascend into higher levels of success in the world. And we'll talk more about that in the Toxic Jupiter video, which is the next video. So another very fascinating description from Gemini about Jupiter is that Jupiter, quote, knows much but says little. So this is an extremely apt description for the old man or the old woman that has that twinkle in their eye and they obviously know something that you don't. But they don't feel the need to express it or say it because usually rightly, they want you to figure it out for yourself. So they prefer to say little because it's probably something that you can only know through experience. So this is a very wise understanding of the world. And there are so many things that simply, they just cannot be explained in order to be understood fully. And explaining them often, it only muddies the waters and it can delay the understanding from really sinking in if you try to explain it to too much detail. So this is that classic image of Jupiter as the guru. And in Sanskrit, the word for Jupiter is guru, but that sage or that guru sitting and speaking very little or speaking in riddles. They're basically saying very little or saying nothing at all, and they're waiting for the student or the pupil to go out into the world and live a life and decipher the true meaning and depth of what the simple phrase is. So Jupiter, as it can go both ways. It can be very good to instill wisdom in other people, to encourage them to go experience the world, to know so much but say very little. But it could go the other way when Jupiter, it doesn't feel like it needs to explain things in a situation that should be explained more thoroughly. So there's kind of a laziness to that it can be, where yeah, you should kind of expand on something that you are trying to express rather than expect other people to know things that it's just faster to tell them something a little bit simpler and to not make them guess and wonder. In different situations, when we're talking about the wise guru giving a philosophy, yeah, he's saying little and speaks in riddles, but in everyday life, using Jupiter in a negative way would to be expecting more from people to be able to read your mind in a certain way and not wanting to say something that probably should be said. So when it comes to, say, an older person, a wiser person, expected to be wise, or someone in their later years, why it's so foolish to argue about politics or religion with, say, a college university student, someone that's beginning their path and creating a worldview. Essentially a person with much more limited life experience. So the proverbial Thanksgiving or Christmas dinner that just creates a conflict and a debate that ends up being fruitless. So I'll explain this in a second about why a wise person wouldn't get into these debates. But there's an important thread in this about idealism. Because Jupiter is the planet, it's the aspect of human nature that creates ideals within us, the best possible scenario or outcome to something. Like I said, thinking about something in a very positive and optimistic light. Jupiter generates that within us as well, that creates ideals. But ideals have to have a balance because we all also have Saturn within us, which is what reveals the reality and the oftentimes harsh realities of the world. So Saturn is a balance to Jupiter that creates realism and, again, also like a practicality. So when you're talking about an idealistic university student feeling very strongly about their beliefs, and then a parent or a grandparent that will want to argue with them about their own ideals, about how things should or shouldn't be done, or about their own belief system and worldview. In that situation, it's best for the older person to sit back and to know much, but say little. You don't have to really, it's not your duty to explain to a young person the ins and outs of your philosophy. Because sooner or later, that young person, they're going to come around and to be able to balance their worldview from their experiences, the realities that Saturn will eventually bring into their reality. So even if they don't come around and they don't see the way that you see the world, that older wise person will just respect that perspective of the other person, and they'll work to understand why that person believes what they believe, rather than just judge them outright and say that they're incorrect. So Jupiter, again, is expanding beyond one's own perspective and to say, oh, I understand why those young people think like that. And even if that young person grows up and still sees the world in that same way, that's okay. You're attempting to understand rather than to judge. And that's what will help a younger person grow into a healthy Jupiter, is to be able to think outside of one's own experience and see why other people believe the things that they do. That's something that changed my life a lot. I grew up in such a liberal Democrat family for the most part, and I was always for the Democrats or whatever. And that was in the era of George W. Bush and the wars in Iraq. And so obviously the blue team was the good guys, the red team was the bad guys, the Republicans. So my whole life I was told that, unfortunately, that by a lot of the left-leaning media environment, that the bad guys, the Republicans, are just evil and they're bad and they have no justification for anything. And then one day you just step out and say, well, what do they believe from their own words? And I'm not a Republican and I don't choose a side. But when you step outside and you start to learn about and try to understand why they believe what they believe, you see that there's a logic to it. And they're not evil. And a big problem with the political world is being able to not see the perspective of why people believe what they believe. And that's what Jupiter does. It's be able to step outside and understand and not judge why they would see the world in that way. So the last two aspects of the Jupiter force within us that I find very, very interesting and fascinating, the first is the element that Jupiter rules. So in Vedic astrology, the sun and the moon, they don't rule elements. We have Mars ruling fire, Mercury rules the earth, Venus rules water, and Saturn rules air, and Jupiter rules the ether. So the ether is the invisible fabric through which all parts of creation are connected. It's like an invisible substrate that interlocks and sustains all of the other elements. So when we say that a person is etherically connected, they're connected to the Ethernet, connected to the ether, that person has access to knowledge of potentially everything, including knowledge of non-material things, so the spiritual realm that is beyond the physical elements and beyond the physical creation. So it is a strong connection to the ether that makes people psychic, or having a very strong intuition to be able to gather knowledge and to not have to logically break them down, but to be able to understand the information in an intuitive way, or more holistic way. So Jupiter actually gives an intuitive understanding and intelligence, just like we talked about how the moon does, but Jupiter has a intuitive ability because of its rulership over the ether. For example, like when a mother knows that their child feels pain or is in danger and they are many time zones away, or to be able to understand a situation from a holistic perspective, if it's a good or bad situation, very similar to how the moon gives intuition, the Jupiter is able to bring in information from multiple sources at once and to create an understanding. And we just call that intuition. And so when we're talking about intuition and the ether, it's Jupiter that is connecting us. It's the force within us that connects us to the very subtle layers of reality, the subtleties of life. And it's our ability to have what we call spiritual intuition, and to be able to see meaning in very small things, but also very large things simultaneously. And again, to be able to access knowledge in anywhere we look, because we can see beauty, or we can see, like I said, meaning anywhere, because the ether is everything. It's connecting everything. So again, as I spoke about before, this is another reason why Jupiter is the spiritual planet. So each planet has a spiritual ability to it, and each planet can teach us very profound spiritual lessons. So it's not just Jupiter gives us spirituality. Jupiter connects us to everything, which creates an otherworldly kind of non-material connection, or a more holistic understanding that everything is connected, and we call that spiritual. But every planet can teach us something deep and lasting about life, and teach us an important lesson that we can call a spiritual lesson. But Jupiter being the force of spirituality really simply means that we're able to access knowledge about the seeming hidden things in life, beyond our daily interactions and beyond just the physical things in the world. And another way to explain Jupiter, or to explain ether, is we call it space, all of space, that everything else, all of the space that is around us, but is also within us. So within all space, we can find the spiritual essence flowing, or the deep knowledge of truth, or the deep knowledge that there are things beyond beyond material world, the five elements, that exist. And it's the Jupiter force within us that gives us the ability to see that is real, even though we can't see it. So a highly functioning Jupiter is able to recognize within oneself that you have this healthy flow of non-material energy, this spiritual energy, and that essence flowing within you, that what feels so good makes you feel really good. And you call that divine love, but it's always flowing through within each person, and to be able to recognize it, and then also to generate more of it, and to be able to see that there's something beyond the material world, and that is the ether, and it's basically beyond everyday human perception. So the second aspect of Jupiter that I started talking about, the second aspect is the sense that Jupiter rules. And it rules over our hearing, the ability to listen. And so again, what do wise people do? They are listening more than they speak. We're born with one mouth and two ears, so we should be listening twice as much as we're speaking. So again, to be able to know much but say little, to be able to listen to the world around us. And a good Jupiter, or the Jupiter part of us, or a good Jupiter, a healthy Jupiter, prefers to listen to the world around us, teaching us things, to be able to learn and gather more information in every moment about life, the large, big questions of life, but also the small things in life, to encompass as much of life as we can. And that requires that ability to listen to the world. And this connects the idea of the ether as well. The idea of the primordial Om vibration. And the Om is the subtle reverberation, the subtle sound that reverberates through the entire material world. And some people say that the Om is the ether itself. So in the book of Genesis in the Bible, when God spoke, his word created the world. That's their version, that's the Bible's version of the creation of the world. He said a sentence or something, but actually, in my belief, it's that that God spoke the Om vibration. The Om vibration is what created all of reality. So it's a sonic energy, and we can't see sounds. And even though we can't see them, we know that they're there. So the more that a person meditates, and the more that you're cultivating your ability to listen on a spiritual level, you can actually perceive this Om vibration. And so Jupiter is this force that gives us this ability to do that, to be able to listen on such a deep level, to be able to actually hear the source of all creation. And that is the Om vibration that permeates through the ether, and you could say is the ether itself. But Jupiter, to be able to listen to the world around you, but also to listen deep on that deep spiritual level. Jupiter is what gives us that ability. So I'll end with one of my favorite quotes, and it's a very Jupiterian quote, and it's by Miles Davis, who wasn't exactly the most spiritual person, but he was an extremely creative person. He saw things he heard things, and he was able to produce such original music throughout his life, basically unmatched. But really quickly, let me say that I spent so much time with jazz musicians when I was younger in high school and in my university days. And jazz is much more like a classical music. I call it American classical music because it requires such a high level of musicality and knowledge in order to play. And at a minimum, you have to have a grasp of music theory on a higher level, and especially the technical musical skills, and to be able to understand more complex ways of composing music. So a big misunderstanding about jazz is that it's all improvising, and when you're hearing a jazz recording that in the solo sections that they are, just feeling the moment. Actually, a lot of those solo sections are already composed beforehand, and they're just simply playing it out, but it sounds like they're just improvising in the moment. But after reading Miles Davis's autobiography, you get the understanding that nothing was improvised except in a concert, that everything was really composed. But even though jazz is so much of a music that is composed much more beforehand, there is soloing involved with it. And what Miles said about soloing, he said, quote, "Listen closely and play what's not there." And this is such an excellent approach to living an original life. And it's not just about jazz soloing, because what this quote is saying is that it's requiring that we're listening to the world around us and to observe what's happening within us and around us, to be acquiring knowledge. Jupiter is the planet of higher learning about everything that we can possibly find out about the world, everything that's there, everything in the space, everything in the ether. The ether is filled with infinite amounts of information, and it's up to us to listen to what life is telling us. That's what we use Jupiter to do. And then we play what's not there, which means that what you don't see or hear coming to you in your life, what hasn't been yet revealed to you, fill the space of the world with that, which you don't already are hearing and seeing. And when you're doing that, what you're doing is you're creating something completely original that comes from within you. And that's what great artists have, and that's what great people have. You don't just have to be an artist to be very creative. But when you're putting your own insights that come from your way of putting together world, when you're putting that out, you're going to be living a much more unique life, and you're going to be seeing your ability to create the life that you want to see happening around you, manifested around you. So that's Jupiter operating as the generator as the creative impulse to put into the world your specific and different contribution. So when I was a senior at university, I was alone in my bedroom writing a play. And I was in this very unique creative headspace. And I got this sensation that creativity is complete blackness, like this infinite chasm. And it was just completely black. And it was just waiting for you to fill it with anything, with any color, with any impulse, with any sound that you put into it. But blackness as this complete void waiting for you to put something there. So the stronger and the healthier the Jupiter is, the force within us, the more you're able to fill that infinite space with your perspective and your uniqueness, and put into that void something that is coming from within you, that comes from you that is honest in that specific moment, to be able to see things that other people don't see, which at the end of it, it serves a higher purpose than just the creativity itself. It's able to put something into the world that other people can look at and say, wow, I've never seen it that way. I've never seen that perspective before. And oh, wow, that's what great art does. It helps a person look at the world from a different way that they haven't already seen before. That's one of the greatest values of art. And that's one of the greatest values of harnessing your creative energy and putting it out there. It will mean something to other people, and it creates deeper meaning for other people, and it can help other people. But then you can also look at that and find deeper meaning within it and create a purpose for yourself, that when you're being honest in the moment, you can access parts of you that aren't so calculated and aren't so specific and aren't all thought out beforehand. Jupiter puts something honest out there in the moment. That's why children are Jupiterian, is because oftentimes they'll say something that is just completely honest, and there are no filters involved. So that originality is such an important part of living a fulfilled life, and to give you deeper purpose, to help guide you to find what the meaning of your life is beyond that day-to-day perspective. And we can do so by being honest in the moment and to be genuine in ourselves. And little by little, it takes time, but little by little, we're able to find our purpose, or our purpose can be revealed to us. And as I said at the beginning, naturally we feel good. Happiness is the feeling that is a byproduct of building on our creative impulses and being original and putting our unique contribution into the world. And it feels good to do that. That's why artists are, when they're in the creative mode, that's their favorite mode to be in. So this is how we can cultivate a healthy Jupiter within us, to understand that creativity comes from deep within us, and it flows within us and it comes outside, and we manifest the original things that we create, but it all comes from within us. And when we allow that to permeate through our entire being, again, that byproduct is happiness, and we can develop a purpose that ends up becoming a very fulfilling purpose, and that gives us deeper meaning to what life is about.